Hi, my name is Darren Gertis. I'm a professor and I've been doing these daily updates on what's going on in Ukraine. First, I want to thank you for being the kind of person that cares about what's going on in Ukraine. And second, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. When you watch through this, if you want more of this, I've been doing these updates now for 140 days. Since day 85, I've been working on these. And if you want more of this, please subscribe. That's the first request. If you don't want more of this, if at any point you decide that you're done watching, please leave me comments about why you decided that this wasn't for you. I know that I'm asking for criticism. I'm asking for you to pants me before the entire world, but that's how you grow. Okay, let's get into it today. Here's the news for today. By the way, here's what I do. I triangulate on different news sources, and then I try to paint a picture of what's going on. I try to find patterns and help you understand, and then I provide context based on what I've already learned. Okay, so first, the armed forces of Ukraine have taken control of 29 settlements in Kherson direction. But what does that mean? It's hard to understand the geography of 29 settlements, and I'll show you in just a moment. This is the UK Ministry of Defense, and they put out an intelligence update every day. Advancing in the south, that's Kherson, Ukrainian units have pushed to the front line forwards by an additional 20 kilometers. Okay, so now we know 20 kilometers deep, but what is that in actual real estate? We'll talk about that in just a moment. Russians face a dilemma: withdrawal of combat forces across the Dnipro, that's a river, which makes the defense of the rest of Kherson Oblast more tenable, but the political imperative will be to remain and defend. And I think that's what's going to actually happen, because the Russian political masters do not want to show that they keep losing this ground. Russia has committed the majority of its severely undermanned airborne forces to the defense of Kherson. So that's who's there. It's actually legit hardcore fighters, but again, hardcore fighters have been routed before. The motivation level is not the same. Okay, so here's the Kherson. Here's today, and I'm going to show you. This is Kherson City. Here's where the fighting has been. So I'm just going to roll back the clock. So this is the day before Putin annexed the territory. Now watch. Here, 9:30, 10:1, 10:2, 10:3, 10:4, 10:6. Wow, that's an amazing amount of territory. So really, Ukraine has been rolling Russian forces back. Okay, let's keep going. This is the ISW, the Institute for the Study of War. Yesterday, Ukraine's northern Kharkiv counteroffensive has not yet culminated after 1 month of successful operations and is now advancing into western Luhansk Oblast. And so what we're talking about is up in the north. Here's today. Let's roll back the clock. This is where we were the day that Putin announced his annexation. And here's what's happened since. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And it's an amazing amount of ground. There's not a massive counterattack, but there's a lot of ground that's taken. Okay, so how much real estate has actually been taken? So this is the President Zelensky's website, and he said since the beginning of October, that's just a few days, it's 6 days in, more than 1,000 square kilometers have been liberated in the Kherson region alone. Now, I showed you both the Kherson and Kharkiv, and so maybe it's 1,000, I don't know, but 1,000, that's 500 square kilometers is 193 miles. So what does that mean? That's about the size of Colorado Springs, just in the Kherson region, which is, and if you're not familiar with American geography, that's America's 45th largest city. So that gives you a sense of what has been done. Now, it's probably about the same or maybe similar. So maybe it would be roughly double that, the size of Indianapolis or Fort Worth, Texas. But hopefully that gives you some understanding, some context. Okay, let's shift our gears and talk about this. Russia attacks Ukraine with 86 Shahed 136 drones. 60% were down. Now these are the Iranian drones that the Russians have just started employing in a big way. The Iranians were saying, no, 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 we haven't supplied any drones about 2 months ago, and Biden called them out on that. In general, since the start of the attacks by the Shahed kamikaze drones, they have used 86 units, 60% of which were shot down. And again, they lied about using them, but they're using them. This is the Institute for the Study of War today. Russia's use of Iranian-made drones is not generating the asymmetrical effects the way that the Ukrainian use of U.S.-provided HIMARS systems has done, and it's unlikely to affect the course of the war significantly. So it's a nuisance, but it's really not having the significant effect that they thought it would. Here's what the drones look like. So here's a building that was attacked by the drone, and so these kamikaze drones are actually just like guided drones that become missiles that they figure out where it is, and then they just destroy themselves and the target. Here's another building that was destroyed by it, that kind of thing. So they can be a pretty significant nuisance, but it's not a game changer. Okay, now Zelensky has been talking about nuclear weapons and the use of nuclear weapons, and he's pretty rattled about it. The U.S. estimate and the British estimate is that the Russians probably won't use it, but President Zelensky believes that they very well might. And he said NATO should make it impossible for Russia to use nuclear weapons. Preemptive strikes are needed so that they know what awaits them if they use nuclear weapons. Now that's some harsh language, but think about this. Israel did the same thing to Iran when Iran was about to spin up its nuclear capabilities. So, and you know, it's not like Russia hasn't been saying we're going to nuke you. Because they have been saying, like, if this goes a little wrong, we're going to nuke you. So, okay. We'll come back to that in an RT article at the end when we have fun with Russian state media. Now, here's another interesting thought. How many Russians have left the country since mobilization? Well, the Kremlin said on Thursday that they denied reports that 700,000 Russians have fled. Now, I saw a previous estimate a few days ago that said it was something like 250,000, something along those lines. Now, 700,000. In a briefing with reporters, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that he did not have exact figures for how many people had left the country since partial mobilization. Now, you do know how many people have gone through the borders. You do know, and I'm sure they're tracking it, but that he's not saying it is really interesting. So I first heard that 700,000 figure from inside Russia. This is a Russian. He has actually fled recently to Turkmenistan, just like some of these other 700,000. And he mentioned that number. And then I looked it up, and here we are. Lo and behold, Forbes Russia reported that the number of people who have left the country since Putin ordered the draft could be as high as 700,000, citing a Kremlin source. Now, Reuters doesn't report fake information. They put out only what they can verify. So, that's a really significant number. But what does that mean? Only 170,000 have actually invaded Ukraine in the early days of the war. More than 4 times the number of Russians have fled Russia than have actually invaded Ukraine in the initial phase of the war. I mean, that's astounding that that many have fled. And I talked about how many have fled here in this episode where I was talking about the Russian citizens allowed to leave. And if you look at the arrows here, I can't hover over it or change, but look at the arrows, where they want to go first. They were trying to go to Finland, and then they were trying to go to the Baltic states. They closed the borders. So now they're going south. They're going down to down into Turkey. They're going into Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan and Mongolia. But I found this fascinating article. A few of them are getting out across the Bering Sea into Alaska, and we're trying to figure out, like, well, what do we do with them?
And now, comrade, it is time for fun with Russian state media.
So here we are. I only have a few articles. Kremlin accuses Zelensky of trying to start a world war. The Kremlin has accused Ukrainian President Zelensky of trying to spark a third world war after he demanded that NATO carry out preventive strikes. Wasn't that your rationale when you invaded Ukraine? It was preventative because NATO was encroaching on your border and you didn't want to let that happen? That's what you said. What should NATO do? Eliminate the possibility of Russia using nuclear weapons, Zelensky said. I once again appeal to the international community as it was before February 24th. Preventative strikes so that Russia, know what will happen to them if they use it and not the other way around. Now, I understand what he's saying. It's a big ask. Now, but of course, the backlash. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said that the Ukrainian leader's comments are nothing short of an attempt to spark a world war, as if invading Ukraine, stealing a bunch of their land, and legally annexing wasn't, moving down that direction and would lead to unforeseeable disastrous consequences. Zelensky was accused of trying to provoke a nuclear war, with spokeswoman Maria Zakharova stating every person on the planet should recognize the unbalanced puppet leader of Ukraine, who has been pumped full of weapons, has turned into a monster whose hands can destroy the planet. I thought we were talking about Putin. No, she's talking about Zelensky. And of course, the US and the UK are to blame for de facto control of Kyiv's actions. That's just standard fodder in Russian state media. Okay, let's look at Pravda. Chairwoman of the Russian Federation Council urges Ukraine to negotiate. Valentina Matykyenko, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that, the Speaker of the Federation Council, that's the higher parliamentary body, invited the Ukrainian parliament to sit down at the negotiating table. Of course, she's going to negotiate with one way. The chairwoman of the upper house of parliament noted, unfortunately, Ukraine, obviously being under external control, turned those agreements down. Well, that's because the United States is, the puppet master behind the scenes. When I spoke about negotiations, I meant that the entry of 4 new subjects into the Russian Federation was not to be discussed. So she wants to negotiate, but not negotiate about that. This is already part of our Russia. However, we are ready to stop further hostilities. Well, that's very kind of you. Although only on the terms Russia will offer. So it's not really very kind of her, but that's what she means by negotiating, and that's not really negotiating. So they'll negotiate on the battlefield, and that's what it's going to amount to. But there's going to be increasing calls for, we want peace, we want to negotiate, and Russia's going to be saying, we're just victims who want to negotiate. But yeah, and so you'll hear it in the rest of the community. Here's TASS. President Erdogan of Turkey just said that the worst peace in Ukraine would be better than continued conflict. That's bad. And we're going to start hearing it in India and China and everywhere else as well. That's my assumption moving forward. Turkish president said, we will continue our efforts to end the conflict with the belief that even the worst peace is better than war. No, it's not. Because what's going to happen, even if they get peace, is that Kyiv will be in jeopardy 10 years later because they're going to do it again. So that's why you have to understand the way that the Russians think. And that's why I look at RT and TASS and Pravda regularly to understand their thinking. Okay, so if you're still here, either subscribe or tell me why you wouldn't subscribe, why you're not going to come back tomorrow, because I'll be back tomorrow and I welcome your feedback. Thanks for your time and attention.